Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, it's official. Mets, Dodgers, NLCS. Here we go. Joe and I break down the matchup from the rotations to the bullpens, all the way down to both lineups. And we even go down on the farm. Trust me, you'll understand. Just stick around. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. Watch us on YouTube, and also ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, and we just watched the Dodgers shut out the Padres in a real stunning game at home for them, Joe. So it's official. The Mets will fly to Los Angeles. They will play the Dodgers in the NLCS. I mean, right out of the gate, I just want your quick thoughts on this game. To me, it's crazy how much energy the Padres had at the beginning of this series and how flat they ended this series. I felt like for so long we were looking around like, man, the Padres in the NL, they're the team that no one wants to see. And here we go. The Mets see the Dodgers instead.
I told people after the first game or two of that series, I was like, the Padres have the Mets vibe and momentum, but probably a better, like, on paper roster. And I was a little scared of that, but as you said, Connor, came out a bit flat here in the last two games and gave the series to the Dodgers. And now we got Mets Dodgers. We got Lindor versus Ohtani. We got 1988 trying to make up for that. I still think it's a Ruben Tejada revenge series, even though the Mets won that series in 2015. I will always seek revenge for Ruben Tejada. And yeah, I mean, this is what Major League Baseball probably would love to see. Two major markets, major stars, and a series I'm really excited to go through today and obviously watch and stress out over for the next week plus.
Who's the better candidate to throw out the first pitch, Game 3, Citi Field, Ruben Tejada or Mike Piazza?
Oh, man. I would love
the fact
if they
you have
brought
to think
Ruben
about it.
Bring Ruben Tejada. They need Ruben Tejada for at least one of those games.
It would be a really good bit, and it would fit in with this Mets team that has had so many interesting wrinkles to it this year, things that they've been able to cling on to. But it's crazy, Joe. We were talking about it before we hit record with our producer, Jeff. This time last year, all we talked about was Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And now, fast forward 1 year later, a guy we're going to be talking about a lot in a much different capacity is Los Angeles Dodger Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Now, we probably won't see him until this thing comes back to Citi Field. So, Joe, how do you look at the first two games in LA for a Dodgers team that the storyline, more so than what their lineup has been able to do, has been that they had to throw a bullpen game in this short series against the Padres? Walker Buehler looked like a guy that maybe doesn't have much in the tank right now. Their original rotation that they went into the season with and some of their depth has been decimated by multiple season-ending injuries. How do you think this team lines up, and how do you like them lining up against a Mets rotation that is just surprising everybody in baseball for the last 3 months, it feels like?
The Dodgers are going to have to navigate the series pretty interestingly. Like you mentioned, Walker Buehler, but by process of lack of other options, Walker Buehler has to be in their rotation for the championship series. Jack Flaherty, of course, who they acquired at the trade deadline from, ironically, Detroit, who have a chance to go to ALCS themselves, but Flaherty might be, I think from a rest standpoint, Flaherty could be lined up to start game one. I obviously haven't seen anything yet about potential starters for the beginning of the series, but it just, you look at that team, it's really Flaherty, it's Walker Buehler, and it's Yamamoto when he's right, and that could be the first game at Citi Field, maybe the second game at Citi Field, depending on how much rest they want to give him. There might be bullpen games mixed into this, and the Dodgers have a fantastic bullpen. And obviously, if you're watching Game 5 here tonight, Alex Vesia left the game with an injury. Don't know the status of that quite yet, but he left the game with injury. So that's kind of one reliever, maybe you knock off, but maybe not. Former Met legend Anthony Banda's in there.
It's crazy.
Just Blake Trinan closing out games has looked really good. Michael Kopech was a guy that I wanted to see the Mets try to get at the trade deadline from the White Sox. He's been electric since joining the Dodgers. So whether the Dodgers have one of these starting pitchers going, or they have a bullpen game going, the Mets certainly have their work cut out for them against this team.
You bring up a great point about Vesia, who's really been untouchable. And this is someone who, left the game with an apparent injury during warmups. That's a big one to keep an eye on, because he's a guy that when he gets in, it's just not much action against him, quite frankly. And that's been the story for a lot of these guys in the Dodgers bullpen. It feels like such a different series and a different series than what the Mets have been dealing with for a little bit. It felt like even going back to when they were playing playoff baseball against Atlanta to end the season, the Mets were trying to get to the Braves bullpen. And then when you look at the Phillies, yes, they have multiple all-stars in their bullpen, but the Mets just had a different confidence against them that, how do we get Zach Wheeler out of this game, right? That's what it felt like with, that way that series started, and get to the bullpen. With the Dodgers, you almost have to look at it in the opposite mold of get after their starters early and get your runs in early, because they have multiple high leverage guys. But the reality is, you bring up Jack Flaherty, Joe, who had a lights out year for the Tigers. It felt like he was for the Tigers what Severino and Manaea have been for the Mets, yes, where you take this flyer on a guy trying to rebuild his career, a once really good pitcher, and everything goes right. Since he's been with the Dodgers, he hasn't been as untouchable, notably recently, but he's been really good for them. But when you look at the last couple games, he's given up at least 3 earned runs in his last 4 starts. So Flaherty's only pitched 6 innings in one of those 4 starts. So he's not Zach Wheeler. Let me say that.
No,
and then
there's no Zach Wheeler.
No, there's no Zach Wheeler. When you look at Walker Buehler, once again, a guy that's really, really struggled. Yamamoto is the most fascinating to me, Joe, and we'll get to him. That's a different conversation because it's further down the road. He was just the guy that got the Dodgers to the NLCS with a big start against the Padres to close out that series, so we're not going to see him for a while. Yamamoto is a guy that, while he looked good against the Padres tonight, he has had some blowups this year as well. So this is just a fascinating series because it feels so different. But then you get back to the core of it, Joe, and it comes down to, can you stop a hampered Freddie Freeman? Can you find a way to, and I'm not going to use the word stop, but can you slow down Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, a big playoff performer like Kike Hernandez? It just feels like October is his month over and over again. Can you find a way to stop those bats? But the reality is, Joe, the Phillies lineup, it could be a murderer's row 1 through 5, 1 through 6 at times, and they had no answer against the Mets pitching for the most part. So if you're a Met fan, I'm not going to sit here and say you're cocky going to this series, but I think you have the right to be confident with what this team has shown you so far.
The last time the Mets played the Dodgers, and I'm going to read the tweet from Abby Mastracco from the Daily News. The last time the Mets faced the Dodgers was the night Jorge Lopez yeeted his glove into the stands. And for my WWE fan friends, yeet. Yeeted his glove into the stands, and the team called a players-only meeting. They've had the best record in baseball since. So, obviously, that was quite a while ago, and things are quite a bit different. And when you look at this Dodgers lineup, you have Freddie Freeman, like you said, dealing with an ankle injury that I believe he said last week that, if this was the regular season, he might miss 4 weeks, and he's trying to just battle through it. Miguel Rojas, a shortstop, he got banged up. So Tommy Edman has been playing shortstop for the Dodgers. And in this series with San Diego, what you really have to look at here is 16 of the 24 runs that the Dodgers scored came by way of home run. So they're not going to necessarily be the Milwaukee Brewers that are just going to kind of be annoying and just singles and singles and walks and stolen bases. The Dodgers are here to mash. So what the Mets pitching has to do is find a way to keep this very potent lineup. And you mentioned the names. We don't have to say them over and over, but these are potent power names. Even Teoscar Hernandez has been huge for them. But you have to find a way to keep this offense in the ballpark. And if you do, you really give yourself in my opinion, a pretty good chance to, maybe win the series, but certainly make this a long competitive series.
Right, that's the key. I mean, keep the ball in the ballpark, and the Mets continue to have timely hitting in their biggest games of the season, and that's what it's going to take against the Dodgers team that I can't emphasize this enough, Joe. Like you said, it feels like have the timely hitting early. And I'm not saying I'm not going to sit here and I know the Dodgers shut out the Padres for what it felt like over 20 innings, I
Yeah.
believe, to end that series, which is it's unbelievable when you hear
With
that.
that offense, crazy.
But it means that they're due to get hit, and the Mets have. What did people think when guys like Hoffman and Strom come in against the Mets for the Phillies? Those guys have been great all season long. Estevez, look at what they traded for Estevez. He was the Angels closer. He was untouchable, and he's a fine reliever in this league. He throws 100 miles an hour. Doesn't matter. Francisco Lindor hits one to the moon. So I think there's so many different things to analyze in this, but if the Mets continue to remain who they've been for the last 3 weeks, they're going to fight in this series. And I know they're going to come into this series as the underdog. And I think a lot of people are going to be, backing the Mets in this series because baseball, more than many others, is a momentum, vibes, and timely type of sport. And right now, especially with Kodai Senga back, and especially with this lineup getting the timely hits at the right time, the Mets are one of those timely teams. And it's, we're on this podcast. You and I are not going to do the Subway Series talk. That's been the talk throughout town. It's very premature. Both New York teams have massive, massive series to get through before they get there. But the opportunity in front of the Mets, it's so funny how we look at this now, Joe. 2 months ago, it felt like, man, can the Mets scratch and claw to a wild card and have an appearance in the wild card of the playoffs? Now, as one of the 4 remaining teams in baseball, you're looking at it and going, how can the Mets win 2 more series to win a title, to win the World Series? And we all think they are good enough and equipped and focused enough and led by the right people to do that right now, where it feels closer than it ever has, Joe.
It's so crazy. I just think back to us being in Port St. Lucie and, watching them on the backfields, doing the show outside of Cloverfield before before the first spring training game. And I'm optimistic, but you couldn't have convinced me we'd be in this spot. And when I look at this, it is no longer house money. And that was kind of like the thought, right? Oh, this was a transition year. The Mets weren't supposed to be here. And okay, they made their way into the playoffs. Now they're playing with house money. If they lose to Milwaukee, it's all right. Still better than they hoped. The Mets are showing that they're just simply a good team. There was Grimace, there was OMG, there was Seymour Wiener, there was Iggy the dog, you name it, just thing after thing after thing. But don't let that completely overshadow the fact that this is a very good baseball team that is straight up, no other way to put it, earn the right to be here. And right now, my mindset is exactly what you said, Connor. How do they win 4 games against the Dodgers? It could be games 1-4. That would be great. It could go 7, whatever it is. The Mets need to find a way to win 4 games here and make their way to the World Series. And if that is a Subway Series, awesome for everybody in New York City. If it's the Tigers or the Guardians, okay, you face who you face. And it's just the fact that we're having this conversation is pretty amazing.
Let me ask you this, Joe. Do you think And this doesn't matter as much in baseball because each series is so small in the grand scheme of the season in terms of the length of games, and so much can happen that can change the tides. That's unpredictable. But do you think any of the teams left in the AL right now are as good as the Dodgers or the Phillies? Because I don't personally.
No, no. I think if the Mets were in the AL, we'd have a bit of a maybe more of a warm and fuzzy feeling. The Yankees are, of course, they have Garrett Cole, they have Aaron Judge,
Top
Stanton is
heavy,
a yeah,
yes.
they're a top heavy roster. The Guardians are a good baseball team, but they just I don't know, they just don't give off the vibe of that type of team. Whereas the Dodgers and the Phillies are, you know, teams that can in any given year, that is a World Series type of roster. So the National League, the Mets are going through a gauntlet, and they may just make their way through that gauntlet.
You said it. It's so funny, the switch or the fine line between get in the playoffs and everything's house money, we're building something here, to then you go too far. And now I'm looking at it and my mindset has changed where I'm like, man, it's tough to get back here. Like, get it done now. It's hard
You
to get
never
back. You
you
never,
never know.
2015, Joe, 2015, and I know 2006 even maybe more so, because 2006, I think we all thought this is the beginning of a long time that they're going to be doing this.
Yeah.
2015, though, because of the pitching, I think we all thought the same thing. Both of those, the aftermath of both of those seasons, I think taught us more than ever how hard it is to be a sustainable, not winner, sustainable, deep postseason team.
Heck, sustainable contender. Like,
That's it.
truthfully, when you look at this Mets team, you could say those same type of things because we talk about the prospects that are coming. We talk about the payroll flexibility that the Mets have, and maybe Juan Soto's a Met. All these things that we talk about that could happen this offseason that you're like, okay, well, they'll just be back next year. There is never a guarantee. The Texas Rangers, granted, they went all in, and some of that was, older players. They went all in. They win a World Series. Didn't really sniff playoff contention at all this year. So you never know when you're gonna be back. So you have to take advantage when you're there in that moment. And we've said this on this show, and it bears repeating. Mets had the best record in baseball since the end of May until the end of the baseball season. The Mets had the second best record in baseball in the month of September. This was not just a team that got hot for 2 months and snuck their way in. This is a team that had a horrendous start to the season, but from, basically Memorial Day on, were as good as anybody in the sport. So they belong here. It is not I don't look at it like a fluke, but you never know when you're going to get back. So now is the time to capitalize, and you have a tough opponent on your hands. That's what happens. It's the playoffs. You're not going to be facing the Chicago White Sox on your way to the World Series.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Joe, let's go down on the farm as promised. How about the Arizona Fall League, Joe? And it's not just Jet Williams or Drew Gilbert. Jeff McNeil is getting at bats in the Arizona Fall League, hoping to help the Mets in the playoffs right now.
Yeah, Jet Williams, he has 2 triples so far in the Arizona Fall League in the short few games that they've played. But yeah, young up and comer Jeffrey McNeil, as I put in our text, working his way, trying to make the big leagues. He's actually a 2015 Arizona Fall League alum, but he as of this recording, he is 1 for 2. But the plan is for McNeil to play tonight and tomorrow, and then join the team in LA. And I think the expectation is Jeff McNeil will be on the NLCS roster. And we talked the other day and said, this is for Luis Angel Acuna, naturally. Things are starting to percolate that the Mets might go a pitcher short.
I like
and maybe
this
that,
much better.
And maybe that means an Adam Ottavino or a Danny Young, who are 2 pitchers. Neither have pitched in the playoffs. I would say if you had to pick one of the two, I guess I'll take Danny Young because theoretically a lefty against Otani and Freddie Freeman. But at this point, it sounds like Luis Angel Acuna stands a good chance of remaining on the roster, and one of the bottom roster relievers may be on the way out for McNeil. And I'm very interested to see how the Mets deploy McNeil. Is he going to start? Is he going to be a late inning player? Is it going to be situational? So I don't know how they're going to handle it. But the fact that the Mets are getting somebody like Jeff McNeil is a bit of a bonus for an NLCS roster.
Joe, my take on it is I think he gives them a left-handed bat that isn't stuck coming in for JD Martinez like Winker is.
Yeah.
Winker is at the point, I would think physically, you see the heating pad on his back, and credit to Winker. Winker's hit in the playoffs.
Yep.
But the Mets in the playoffs aren't interested in Jesse Winker in right field right now. With McNeil, if you're in a dire situation, right? Let's look at it like, here's an example for you. Say there's the bases are loaded or even runners up first and second with no outs or one out. Francisco Alvarez's spot is up. You could pinch hit McNeil. You could still put him in the field, and then you were able to get away from having Louis Torrens have to hit in that situation. So that's one scenario through my mind. You know, it's just they don't have left-handed bats on the bench like McNeil.
Yeah, that's huge. DJ Stewart was a guy coming into the season was supposed to be the left-handed bat off the bench. And that didn't exactly work out. But within the confines of this series, it could be for a Harrison Bader. You could pinch hit for him late if you want to, or a Tyrone Taylor. And McNeil's versatility just gives the Mets options. And that's what you want at this stage of the game is options to do whatever you need to within the confines of any particular situation. McNeil's ability to play second, left, or right just gives you all the flexibility in the world, which is what Carlos Mendoza wants. I wouldn't be surprised if he got a start or two in this series, but I do think it might be for the best for him to come off the bench and, just find the right spot to, put that contact bat in the lineup for, like you said, you need a single to drive in a runner. You need someone to just put the ball in play. That's a good spot for Jeff McNeil.
Yeah, the problem is Iglesias' glove has just been so
you can't
good.
take him. You can't take him out.
You can't take Iglesias out right now. That's the problem. And even, in the postseason, he's been okay at the plate, but it's just hard to take his glove out. So it'll be interesting. And back to the point about being a pitcher short, you kind of hinted at this. I don't want to see Adam Ottavino pitching in the NLCS unless the Mets are losing 11-0. And if the Mets are losing 11-0, throw a position player out there to get through the game and
get Eddie Alvarez back. I know we can't, but bring Eddie Alvarez back.
Yes, the Eddie Alvarez special. So it'll be really interesting. This series is going to be something, man. Before we close here, do you want to give a prediction? Did we? I don't even remember. Did we? I think we both picked the Mets to beat the Phillies. I don't remember at this point.
I think what I've said for each series, and I'll say it again, it's not just because the Mets pod never stops. We'll be doing this again.
Yes, we will. That's a good prediction. I think we'll be previewing a World Series that has the Mets in it, and it'll be remarkable. All right, this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today, and remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.